I remember when equipment used to last years, even decades, when they weren't even being taken care of. Then that nasty word came out which most of us don't like to hear. That word is change. That's right, what you knew is now gone, and in its place is something different and quite possibly foreign to you. But don't you want things to change and get better? And what's so wrong with change then? Well, everything. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this very bright green lawn boy mower, or is it a Toro? I'm still not sure at this point, and you'll see what I mean later on. And the problem is that it will start, but it's really difficult to start when it's cold. However, if the engine is already warm, it's a breeze to start. Now, this is not a complete repair video. In fact, this is a revisit of an older repair from years ago. So if you want to see the actual repair video, click on the link at the top of the screen. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about the inevitable change that happens over time to companies that have been around for a very long time. Now, this is not going to be the history on any one brand, but I will be addressing some of the changes to the brand you're seeing on the screen. So I can remember seeing my first lawn boy mower and saying to myself, what a strange looking mower. It had funny wheels on it, and the engine was also one that I had never seen before as well. And what that mower represented to me was that there were other brands out there that I hadn't been exposed to yet. It also showed me that things are not going to stay one way for any amount of time, and that if I wasn't ready for it, I was going to get a wake-up call very soon. So what do you think of when I say the word lawn boy? I know what I was thinking. I see a mower with an oddly located grass chute, one wheel that was in the wrong location, and something that sounded like a two-stroke outboard motor on a small boat, but I'm more interested in what you think of when I say that brand name. Now, depending upon your age, you might be imagining the same thing, otherwise you'll be seeing a newer version of it from the last couple of years. But the one thing you're going to notice is that after some time, the brands you remember might change, whether that's in a couple of years or, if you're lucky, in a couple of decades. So what's the problem with that kind of change? Well, nothing really, just so long as the change you're seeing is something you don't have a problem with. The biggest problem for me to get over on this brand was the elimination of the two-stroke engine. And the reason why is because this engine was simply fantastic when compared to the other engines at the time. So my opinion is that engine was perfect. It was powerful and light, and since it was a two-stroke, there were no oil changes. So what's the big deal about having to do an oil change once or twice a year? The answer is really simple: commercial use. Not having to worry about doing oil changes has a big impact on the way your business operates. So if you were using a lawnmower on a couple of yards a day, every week, all through the mowing season, on a 4-cycle, you'd probably have to change the oil once a week. But for the two-stroke, you don't have to worry about it. Remember, the people using the equipment are there to only use it, not take care of it. That meant someone had to take the time to do the maintenance, and if that wasn't you, it'd have to be the repair shop. So you can see the attraction of using them for commercial use or even residential use. Of course, not everyone cared for that engine. As a well-known fact, two-stroke engines make a lot of pollution, so of course that meant they had to disappear because environment. And with that sort of reputation, along with ever-growing concerns, it did mean the two-stroke on this engine had to go away. The only part that didn't make sense was that they didn't ban all two-strokes at the time, only this one, which seemed a bit odd, don't you think? Now, at that time, this mower with the two-stroke wasn't all that popular, so they probably only represented a tiny percentage of all the lawnmowers being used. So why would you ban them and let all the other two-stroke equipment stay on the market for decades more? Now, I don't have the answer for it, but I can probably guess we're never going to find out the real answer to that question. So in this case, the change I most cared about was the loss of the two-stroke engine, but unfortunately, even more changes were on the way. Later on, the company was sold to a competitor, and with that change, so did the lineup of their equipment. Of course, with the change in ownership, the company that bought them out started to impose their manufacturing process as well, which started to make the lawn boy feel less like themselves and more like the other stuff from the larger company. Now, they didn't put the same parts all over it because it would make it too obvious, but in less noticeable locations, they did just that. So besides using some of the same parts, was there any real benefit for the consumer? Well, that's a tough one to answer, and it would really depend upon the consumer. The biggest concern would be, of course, cost. Do the new machines after the acquisition feel cheaper or better than before? This would depend upon the person who's using the machine, but you don't need to be any kind of specialist to know when you're using something that's junk. It's like eating out at a restaurant. You may not be a food critic, but you know what tastes good and what has no taste at all. So after saying that, what are my thoughts about this mower then? Well, it doesn't feel special like the older model did, that's for sure. It feels like other mowers I've used before, and all that charm it had, well, that's all gone, and replaced with mediocrity, but is that a bad thing? Now, for some consumers, it might be just fine the way that it is, but for others, they might feel the same way that I do. Now, for those of you who do care to know the details about this particular mower, it has a terrible history, and because of that fact, I really don't care for it too much. When I found this mower, it was being given away for free, and when I got it home, I found out why. For some reason, this engine has a terrible reputation for developing one of the worst oil leaks you'll ever see. The other reason I don't care for this engine is the carb setup on it is much too complicated even when compared to Honda engines, which is saying quite a bit. And for those of you who only work on Briggs engines, you're going to get a real surprise when working on one of these. Now, Briggs tried to keep their engines as simple as possible and easy to work on, words I would never use when working on one of these engines. Of course, this has to do with the engine and not the rest of the mower, which the larger company really doesn't have anything to do with. However, it was their choice to put that engine on there, so some blame can be put on them for it. As for the rest of the mower, there really isn't any serious criticism about it. It's just a metal mowing deck with plastic wheels and a metal handlebar. So am I saying the rest of the mower doesn't matter as much as the engine? Well, kinda. Let's say this, the engine is probably the most discernible part of the entire mower. Most consumers who look at one will fixate on the big thing in the middle and probably not realize all the details around it. What that means is some consumers will never even realize there's been any other changes besides a different choice in engines and not realize that their beloved brand just went through a massive change. And to be honest, that's how the companies want it to be. They don't want you to notice that there's been any changes and want you to see them as upgrades instead from the year before. They would rather have the changes in manufacturing and the differences in the products fly under the radar and for you to keep buying them as if nothing had ever changed. Unfortunately, some changes can't be hidden and there's no way to get around the fact that something has changed. Now, the changes I've been talking about happened a long time ago, and for some of you watching may not have experienced it, but the massive changes that have happened in the last couple of years are really hard to miss. Don't worry, everyone's seen the changes, and that's because it's obvious and pretty much in your face. And if you're still at a loss as to the change I'm talking about, well, I'll go ahead and tell you, it's battery power. Shocker, I know. So unless you have an issue with your vision, the changes are right there in the open. In fact, it's proudly displayed like a bunch of trophies. Most times there'll be stickers on the mower indicating that it's battery powered, and if it's important enough, we'll show you just how much voltage the system is rated for. Most will be made out of plastic and will look something like a background car from a furiously fast movie from 20 years ago. They certainly don't look like most of the mowers from only a couple of years ago. Now, some of them still use metal mowing decks, but as soon as those are gone, it's all plastic from then on, and the reason why is because it's cheap and environmentally friendly. Now, the last part I did make up, but that's because we don't talk about the use of plastics anymore. Of course, the change from metal parts to plastics has been going on for the last several decades. And even though we've accepted it, the fact remains it was always with cost savings in mind and nothing else. This change from metal to plastic isn't just in this topic because if you've been driving for the last 60 years, this is old news to you. Now, there's nothing wrong with plastics just so long as it was made to be light and durable, but somehow I don't think that was the real reason why they switched over. Plastics used on newer vehicles have a tendency to warp or fail after a certain amount of time has passed by. That's going to leave you with a high repair bill that's sure to not end until you replace every single piece of plastic. That means you can either worry about which plastic part is going to fail next, or you can just buy a newer model with even more plastic on it. So it seems they're not going to give you much of a choice, so it's up to you as to which one you're going to live with. But the biggest question of all is, what are you going to do about it? Unfortunately, for most of us, there's nothing you can do. However, for some, they're going to hang on to their 1985 Lawn Boys with a two-stroke on it, continue to drive their 1985 truck, and keep getting their drinks out of their 1950s GE fridge because that thing simply won't stop running. So if you like the idea of change, that's great, but I like what I have and I want to keep using it. That means I'm going to keep changing the oil in it for as long as oil is still around and hopefully gasoline too. Because one day, both of those will be off limits to us, making the stuff we have right now pretty much useless. I'm not looking forward to that day, so I'm going to enjoy it for as long as I can, and I recommend that you do the same thing. And when that day comes, we'll have no choice but to accept it. However, I don't know if I'll ever like it like I did the older stuff. There are plenty of cases out there of consumers hanging on to their mowers for 3 or even 4 decades. And as much as companies don't like to hear it, they're going to keep hanging on to them until the very end. Now, I don't know if I'll be able to do that because things do happen, but I like to try my best to keep these machines running for as long as possible, and so should you. And if you can't, that's fine too. So my question is, are you opposed to change with your equipment, or do you like getting new ones every couple of years? Now, nothing wrong with it, but for me, I'll let someone else deal with that instead. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.